This show is produced by the Harwood Podcast Network.
Hi, I'm Cindy Harris. We love making this show available to you free of charge. And if you'd like to help us keep it that way, make a contribution to our Karma Jar or become a show sponsor. To learn more, visit our website. Hi, and welcome back to the Bead Workshop. Today we're going to be making a twisted multi-strand bracelet. Now let's go over here to our design. What we're going to be doing is making 3 separate strings of beads, and then we're going to put them together. So over here I show you for strand 1 we need 32 4mm beads. For strand 2, we're going to be using some 4mm and some 3mm beads. And then for the third strand, we're going to be using, again, some 4mm beads. Now, I wanted to show you the kind of beads that I picked up for this project. I got strings of them, again, at the craft store. And you can see 2 of the strands are the same. And those are going to be my 4mm beads. And then this one in the center, this is the one that has the 4mm and the 3mm. So when you're looking for your beads, you may want to see if you can find some strands, get 2 that are the same and then 1 that's a little bit different. Now for our findings, we're going to be using something called a cone finding. And this is a really interesting thing. It allows us to put, and you can look in our diagram here, we can put all 3 strands of the beads into the wide end and then put the clasp at the other end. So they have some really interesting ones out in the world. So see if you find some that you like. We're going to need 2 of those. We're going to be using 2 eye pins. We're going to need 6 of the crimping beads, so I have those here. I'm going to be using a lobster clasp. Now sometimes on bracelets people like to use the toggle, but I prefer to use a lobster many times because I don't want it to fall off of me. So I've got that. I'm going to be using some beading wire, and I actually found some of this pretty, it's a gold beading wire, so that will go nicely with our beads. And I'm going to need between 6 to 9 inches, and here's how you figure that out. On the chart here I've listed the different sizes of bracelets. So for example, if you have a small wrist, you may want to go 6 to 7 inches in beading wire length. If you have a medium wrist, and that's what I'm going to be building today, a 7.5 to 8 inch piece. A large would be 8.5 to 9 inches, and you do always want to add 2 inches to the length. That gives you a little wiggle room for the ends. And then I've put down 2 jump rings, and we may or may not need them. They may come in handy when we're connecting our lobster clasp to the eye pin that's coming out of our cone. So we'll have to just kind of wait and see. Now we're going to start by building strand 1, and so I'm going to take my beads off of my card here and lay them on my bead board. Then take your beading wire, and for me it's 7.5 inches. I'm going to measure that. That will go around my wrist, plus 2 more inches. That'll bump it to 9.5. That way it gives me plenty of room to help thread my crimping bead. Now have a look here on our design. These little loops on the end are actually beading wire. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start by putting a crimp bead on one end of our wire, and I'll thread that through. And then remember, whenever we're working with a crimp bead, we then want to feed it back through. So we want to make sure we leave a little bit of a loop, and that looks about right. And then I pinch that with my flat nose pliers, and that gives us a nice tight loop. And then I'm going to go ahead and snip that tail off while I'm at it. So if I hold this down, you can see that's the beginning of our design. Now it's a question of just stringing our beads on. Now if you're going for more of a large bracelet, you may have to add a few more beads. And then I do want to leave about an inch on the end so that I can, as you can see here, we need to put another crimp bead and loop it through. Make sure you leave a little loop there at the end, and then we take our flat nose and we pinch that. And then at this point I just like to do a double check, making sure that's going around my wrist easily, which it is. So that's our first strand. That's completely done. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the second strand. Now this one is basically the same thing, except for we're going to alternate between a 4mm and a 3mm bead. Now I wanted to show you a little trick that I do sometimes when I have beads that are already strung for me when I purchase them. What I do is I take my wire, and with the beads still on their little filament, I just thread it right through the center, and then I pull the beads off onto my wire, and it's a really easy way to kind of speed things along. I'll usually thread maybe 3 or 4 beads on a time, and then make sure to pull them off. And then once I have about an inch on the end, I'll take my crimp bead and add that, thread it back through. And then once I have that threaded, I'll pinch that. And we have our second strand, and then I'm just going to do the same thing with the third. Now we have all 3 of our strands done. Now we're going to put them together. Now as you can see on our drawing here, we have the 3 strands feeding up through the cone to an eye pin here. We're going to take our eye pin, I'm going to open that up a little bit so that the hook opens up, and I can string the ends of one side so they look kind of like this, and then I'll take and close that back up. Now at this point you'll see they kind of twist together in all kinds of ways, which is kind of neat. And then we take our little cone and we feed that through there, and see, notice how that covers up the ends there. And then this is just a regular wire loop that we're going to create here. I'm going to snip off that end, make the right angle towards me, and make a loop. Now before I totally close that loop, I want to see if that will fit on my lobster claw, which it totally will. So it doesn't look like I'm going to need a jump ring there. So I'm going to take and thread that on there and totally close that end. Now before we do the other end, this is where the twisting comes into play. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sort of overlap these a little bit, not really braiding them, but just kind of twisting them. Or you could leave it totally straight if you'd like. Looks pretty either way. We take our other eye pin, grab those other ends, we'll close that up, get our last cone, feed that through. Again, it covers those ends up really nicely, and we'll give that a snip. Make our right angle and our loop, and I'll put the other end of my lobster clasp on. Now for this one I need a little help holding it, so I'm going to hold it with one of the other pliers, the flat nose, and then I'll string it on and then roll it with my round nose. And there we have our pretty multi-strand bracelet. Now if you'd like to try making this bracelet at home, just go to our website and go to the Bead Workshop show notes, and I'll have the design there for you with a list of all the supplies that you need. If you do end up making this bracelet, don't forget to send me a photo so I can send you the bracelet badge and the wire loop badge. Please join us on Facebook, and as always, if you have any questions or ideas for me, please send me an email. See you next time.